The Three Brothers by Letitia Landon. They dwelt in a valley of sunshine, those brothers. Green were the palm trees that shadowed their dwelling. Sweet, like low music, the sound of the fountains that fell from the rocks around their beautiful home. There the pomegranate blushed like the cheek of a maiden when she hears in the distance the step of her lover, and blushes to know it before her young friends. They dwelt in the valley. Their mine was a cornfield heavy with gold, and in autumn they gathered the grapes that hung clustering together like rubies. Summer was prodigal there of her roses, and the ringdoves filled every grove with their song. But those brothers were weary, for hope like a glory lived in each bosom, that hope of a future which turns where it kindles the heart to an altar, and urges to honor and noble achievement. To this fine spirit our earth owns the greatest, for the future is purchased by scorning the present, and life's redeemed from its clay soil by fame. We leaned in the shades of the palm trees at evening, when the crimson haze swept down the side of the mountain. Glorious in power and terrible beauty, the spirit that dwelt in the star of her birth parted the clouds and stood radiant before them. Each felt his destiny hung on that moment. Each from his hand took futurity's symbol. One took a scepter and one took a sword. But the little lute fell to the share of the youngest, and his brothers turned from him and laughed him to scorn. And the king said, "The earth shall be filled with my glory." And he built him a temple. Each porphyry column was the work of a life, and he built him a city. 100 gates opened the way to his palace, too few for the crowds that were knelt as his slaves. And the highest tower saw not the extent of the walls. The banks of a river were covered with gardens, and even when sunset was pale in the ocean, the turrets were shining with taper and lamp, which filled the night wind as it passed them with odors. The angel of death came and summoned the monarch, but he looked on the city, the fair and the mighty, and said, "Ye proud temples, I leave you my fame." The conqueror went forth, like the storm over ocean, his chariot wheels red with the blood of the vanquished. Nations grew pale at the sound of his trumpet, thousands rose up at the wave of his banners, and the valleys were wide with the bones of the slain. He stood on the mountain, no foeman was near him, heavy and crimson his banner was waving over a plain where his victories were written in blood, and he welcomed the wound whence his life's tide was flowing, for death is the seal to the conqueror's fame. But the youngest went forth with his lute, and the valleys were filled with the sweetness that sighed from its strings. Maidens, whose dark eyes but opened in palaces, wept as the twilight they murmured his words. He sung to the exile the songs of his country, till he dreamed for a moment of hope and of home. He sang to the victor, who loosened his captives, where the tears of his childhood sprang into his eyes. He died, and his lute was bequeathed to the cypress, and his tones to the hearts that loved music and song. Long ages passed. From the dim world of shadows, these brothers returned to revisit the earth. They came to revisit the place of their glory, to hear and rejoice in the sound of her fame. They looked for the palace, the temple of marble, the rose-haunted gardens. A desert was there. The sand, like the sea in its wrath, had swept over them, and tradition had even forgotten their names. The conqueror stood in the place of his battles, and his triumph had passed away like a vapor, and the green grass was waving its grove of wildflowers. And they, not his banner, gave name to the place. They passed the king's garden, and there sat his daughter, singing a sweet song remembered of old. And the song was caught up and sent back like an echo from a young voice that came from a cottage beside. Then smiled the minstrel. "You hear it, my brothers? My songs yet are sweet on the lute and the lip. King, not the vestige remains of your palaces. Conqueror, forgotten the fame of your battles. But the poet yet lives in the sweetness of music, the appeal to the heart, and that never forgets.